today's session is obviously the Mind Couch series every Tuesday at 11. And this session today is focused on the importance of self-awareness. So we've got our guest host today, Chris, who's going to take you through a session on this. This is episode 6 now, so we've been going for quite a few weeks with this, and we've come to the end of the initial program, and from next week we're going to release the next program of sessions as well. But by all means, guys, if there's anything you guys want to see or anything that you want to even be part of as well, just send me a message, email me, Slack me, whichever, and let me know what you'd like to see on here. But on that note, I'm going to hand over to Chris now and let him take you through today's session.
Great. Thank you, Sheila. And morning, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Just going to share my screen and get this set up. Right. Cool. Yeah. So as Sheila mentioned, I think everyone knows who I am, so I don't really need to do much of an introduction on this call. You've probably seen my face in the office, or well, that was months ago now, but recently on these as well. So today I'm going to be talking a bit around the importance of self-awareness in business. So through this session, I'm going to give you a bit more of an idea of exactly what we mean by self-awareness and look at some of the key areas that you can start to think about, from what you think about, what you believe, what you feel, and how they can help you, not just in your job, but in your everyday life as well. It's something that's really helped me over the years. I'm very open about this. I used to suffer a lot of anxiety when I was going through my early sales career and wanted to learn a lot more about like what makes us tick and what works for us. And it kind of led me on the path as to where I am now. And I think, raising my self-awareness has become a big part of that along the way. So let's get started. In a nutshell, self-awareness is your story versus reality. So how aligned your story is in what's going on in your head versus what's actually happening around you, is the level of self-aware you are. So if your story is this amazing, beautiful world, but the actual reality is that there's a lot of challenges going on and you're kind of, in denial about it, not aware of it, that's probably quite low self-awareness. Versus if it's very aligned and actually what is happening in front of you is what's going on in your mind, which you can influence, that is a level of high self-awareness. And self-awareness is kind of influenced around 3 main areas: your thoughts and beliefs, your emotions, and your habits and behaviors. Because what you think affects how you feel, and how you feel affects how you act, and how you act affects how you think. So it's kind of like all of these things play into one another. So I'm going to take you through each of these 3 things today and look at it from a state of lack of awareness of what might be happening and some of the challenges, and then a state of self-aware, what you can maybe start to reframe. I'm not expecting people from this today to come off this call thinking I'm super self-aware now, but I would like you to take some things away that I think you can put into practice straight away that can help increase some of that self-awareness and maybe spot some gaps and things that you might find challenging at the moment that you might not even be aware of right now. So I thought I'd start with this quote. It's quite a meaningful one. It's something that I always think about and reference when I speak to people about this. Your relationship with yourself sets the tone for every other relationship you have. And I think, whether there's people in sales on this call or whether you're in any department, any relationship you have, we talk about, getting on better with our team, with our colleagues, with our customers. But if you don't have a strong relationship with yourself, you're not fully able to do that properly. So, when we talk about relationship building, I think what gets neglected sometimes is the relationship you have with yourself. So that's what we're going to talk about today, how you can start to become more mindful of that as well. So let's kick things off with thoughts and beliefs. And I'm going to start with a little story to do with an elephant. And this guy was, this man was walking through these fields one day, and he saw these large group of elephants in the field, no fences around them. And he thought, well, why are they not running away? So he started walking a bit closer, and he saw that they had a bit of rope and a small peg tied into the ground. And he thought to himself, that's nothing. Like, why can't the elephant just pull that away? That's so tiny. He's so much stronger than that. So he spoke to one of the people that were walking past, and they said that when the elephants are young in that region, what they'll do is they'll get a bit of rope and a peg and they'll put it into the ground. And because they're young and small, they can't actually run away. They try, but they give up eventually. And as they grow older, all they do is make the rope bigger, but they just keep the peg in the ground. Because what the elephant has been conditioned to think is that he can't move that peg. That peg is unmovable. He can't do anything with it no matter how much he tries. So after a while, he gives up. And this is a bit like some of the thoughts and beliefs that we have, some of the statements that we have in our head, they can be, in a way, things that we've always led to believe, but there's no evidence behind them. And what happens is they stop us from being successful. They stop us from reaching our potential. They stop us from exploring and finding out new things in life. And they come at a place from limited and non-serving. And we accept them as unquestionable facts. And some of these statements might look like some of these that you might be familiar with listening to this. I'm not good with money, for example, or I'd never be able to do that. I won't, I can't, I'll always be, I don't think, that won't work. And people might ask you sometimes, why do you think that? And you go, I don't know, I just do. Because there isn't really any evidence behind it. And what happens here is that these statements that you're creating in your mind, all it's telling your brain is that this is a fact and you shouldn't do anything with it. Because with a statement, there isn't anything to go around it. It's not a question. So let's just accept it. And the challenge with that is that it stunts your personal growth and your development, whether it is things that you think, oh, I can't do that. I could never go for that role in the business, or I could never, speak up about that in a meeting. Or it might be in your personal life, I'm not good with money, or I'm not good with this type of sport. Whatever it might be, it can be limiting. So a big thing here, when we are looking at it from more of a self-aware point of view, is turning statements into questions. So I like to use the analogy that our minds are a bit like a Google search engine. Anything that we type in, it's going to come back with an answer. So if we type in, I'm not confident with X, I could never do this, I could never go up smoking, I could never get bitter, it's just going to come back and go, fine, that's cool. If you type into Google, the earth is flat, I don't know if anyone's seen the Flat Earthers documentary on Netflix, it will come back with all the evidence to say, yeah, you're right. Here's the evidence to say that. But if we can turn things into questions, so how could I become better in that? How could I make that successful? How could I become more confident with this? It starts getting our brain to think more constructively in a way that isn't just limiting our thinking, it's expanding it. That's what our brains are there to do. It's there to create, problem solve. And if we're able to do that and turn things into questions, we're able to work around things more. So be mindful of this. The really good thing just to start thinking about this with yourself is when you are in these situations, be mindful of your self-talk in things when you are getting stressed or a challenge, and think, am I giving myself a statement or am I asking myself a question? And it's a good thing to ask of your teams as well. When you're working with someone, if someone calls you up, or, we're not going to be alongside each other for a while. So if someone speaks to you on Zoom or calls you up or on Slack, and you feel like a lot of it is kind of like statement led, is try and get the conversation more of a solution base of, okay, what's the question to that? If this is the problem, what's the question? How do we get around this? So that's the first thing. The second thing as well with thoughts and beliefs is that we can often feel like everything needs to be perfect. And the problem with perfection is that it doesn't exist. And if you ask someone to describe a perfect day or a perfect life, they can't quite put their finger on it, but they know they're not there. And the problem with perfection is that, one, it doesn't exist. Two, it's often based on other people's opinions. You might be feeling at the moment, if you are working, that every day you're finishing and you're thinking, oh, just didn't get this done, I didn't get that done. And you're frustrated with yourself because you think, oh, it wasn't the perfect day, I missed all these things. Whereas if you look at it more like satisfaction is something you can measure over time. You can put milestones in. Satisfaction is based on your own opinion, not others. Everyone's level of satisfaction is different, and it can grow with you over time. Your level of satisfaction for your lifestyle, for example, or your job has changed from where it was 2 years ago to now, and it will change in 2 years' time. And satisfaction is a far more effective way to think about at the start of the day than perfection. So by simply asking yourself, rather than what does it need to be perfect today, because that means nothing going wrong, is what would I be satisfied with getting done today? Or what would make it a satisfied day for me? And just writing those things down. And then at the end of the day, just asking yourself, am I satisfied with it? Because if I am, that's all I need to be. And those satisfaction levels will grow, as I mentioned. So it's not a case of just thinking, well, I'm not reaching my potential here. But thinking about it in that way can really help your thoughts and beliefs, rather than thinking everything needs to be perfect, because again, it's not attainable. And when you start to become more self-aware with your thoughts and beliefs, they become more limitless and serving. They're there because you're asking yourself questions. You're supportive of them. And some of you might be familiar with that picture on the right-hand side if you've listened to the Headspace app, They talk about a great analogy where your thoughts and your beliefs are a bit like sitting at the side of a motorway and watching cars go by. Is that thoughts are going to come and go. You have no choice over what thoughts come into your head, but you have a choice of how you act on them and what you do with them. And if you're coming at it from more of a self-aware point of view, you can see yourself on the side of the road watching all of those things going by. Whereas what it can feel like sometimes when you're coming from a place of lack of awareness is that you're in the motorway itself and everything's coming towards you. And as soon as something comes onto you, it affects your whole day, it affects your whole state at the time. So really think about that when you're having these things, your self-talk, is how are you framing them into questions, and the conversations you're having with yourself. Are you looking for perfection or are you looking for satisfaction? And some of these things I've mentioned already, but when you start to look at these, what they can do, they can help increase confidence, your self-belief, because you're removing some of those limited beliefs, and empower you, a clear headspace to maintain momentum. You're not overcome with every thought that comes into your head. You're aware of it. You can park it. Can problem solve more effectively and take ownership. Now, I saw a great post a few weeks ago about responsibility, fault versus ownership. And sometimes everyone wants to pass fault on what's happened. And sometimes it's about, well, even if it wasn't your fault, it's taking ownership. It's taking responsibility to move something forwards, because all fault does is dwell on the present. It doesn't get us anywhere. If we can take responsibility or ownership of something, we can start to move forwards with it. And to help able to develop your and fulfill your potential as well, by thinking more limitless and starting to think about those beliefs. So that in a nutshell there is a bit around the thoughts and beliefs. So if we move on to emotions. Now, some of you who maybe even if you have been furloughed or unfurloughed have probably been feeling like this recently. I know a few people probably on here have. And this is sometimes how we can feel when our emotions are getting the better of us. And when we come from a place of lack of awareness, first of all, we either ignore, suppress, or accept them. We just accept, oh, this is a stressful job, or I just get stressed easily. Or we try and suppress them and think, oh, I feel really anxious, but I want to ignore that. And the problem with this is that they're still there. And what starts to happen is that they control and impact us. Every state that we get into, we're very aware of it. And sometimes other people are. And you might think of people, whether it's in your personal life, family, friends, or colleagues, that you can see sometimes are very visual with how their emotions are impacting them. And the challenge is when you let emotions control and impact you, you come from a place of fear. And I'll talk about the other side of it shortly, but coming from a place of fear is going into situations thinking the worst of things, thinking because you're anxious and you're stressed that there's going to be the worst outcome possible. You go into a meeting, you have to call someone, you go in to meet a customer. All of those kind of frame of mind, again, comes back to the thoughts and beliefs, puts you in a negative state. And, the great saying that Henry Ford said, whether we believe we can or we can't, we're always right. We'll always look to be led by how we're thinking or feeling. We'll always look to prove ourselves right because we hate being proved wrong. And the other side of this as well with the emotions is that there was a study where around 75% of our emotions, of how we're feeling, are actually related to past or future memories or thoughts, not actually based on the present. So you'll probably be able to relate to this, in that when you feel stressed or anxious or worried, it's often not because of the current situation. It might have been something that's happened, or it might be something that's coming up. So it's really thinking about, in these situations when this is happening, is this affecting me right now? Because the brain doesn't know the difference. The primal brain, our emotive side, doesn't know the difference between the past, present, or future. It's why when we think of memories, like fond memories, like favorite times together with people or friends and family, we smile, we feel that emotion there, because our brain doesn't know the difference. It thinks it's happening right now. But of course, if that's a negative feeling from the past or the future, it can have the same effect on us as well. So what does it look like to come from a more of a self-aware space? The first one is seeing emotions as neutral. There's a bit of a misconception around emotions that, we park them into a positive or negative camp. Unless we're happy or excited, everything else is negative. And then as soon as we start feeling that emotion, we have that idea that, okay, well, this is a negative emotion, so it's bad. and we let it sabotage us. So it's thinking about all emotions are actually there to serve us, not sabotage us. And I'll give you a perfect example: stress. Stress is perceived as a negative. Stress is perceived as something that doesn't help us. But when we're stressed, we release something called oxytocin, a hormone that is actually known as the cuddle hormone. And it actually forces us to speak out, to be vocal, to be social with people. Because when we're stressed, we actually look for help from others. It's the time when, okay, our body's gone, right, we can't handle this, we need some support in some way. So we release this hormone and it actually makes us social. It makes us want to go and speak to other people as well. So when you're stressed, it's actually your body telling you, look, if I stayed in a normal state right now, I wouldn't be able to cope with what's going on. So I need to sort of rise above it. It's like, the thermostat's gone up because it's colder in the room. So the heating's gone on to get it warmer. That's what's happening in your body. It's gone, right, I'm here to serve you. I'm here to help with this situation. Because if I just stayed really placid and calm and there's 10 different things going on right now, I couldn't operate. So the fact that I'm stressed is a good thing. And when we are stressed, we release another hormone near the end of it called cortisol. And what happens with cortisol is that it's actually designed to bring our bodies back to a natural state within 90 seconds of coming into our system. The problem is we often live in a stressful state in our mind. We tell other people about it. We live in it. We say, I'm just stressed today, or I've just had a stressful week. And we can kind of let it get the better of us when our body is actually going, well, hang on a second. If you just stay still in the moment, I can actually help you here. So it's thinking about some of these emotions. Anxiety, for example, I talk about it a lot. I mentioned it at the start. I used to see it as a saboteur, something that would really impact me. But what I've now started to realize over years of thinking about it is actually it's there to serve me. When I feel anxious, it's actually telling me something's not quite right. And I need to work that out, whether that's something that's going on in work or like something that I might have missed or that might be coming up or something that's going on in my personal life. It's something that I need to address. So I've started to frame it as actually, do you know what? This is helping me. This is like an alarm system. This is benefiting me. It's serving me, not sabotaging me. The other side of this as well, when you start to think about it that way, is that you can realize that, okay, this emotion that I'm feeling, is it something that's happened or is it something that's going to happen? Because it's not serving me if I'm thinking that of what's coming up or what's happened. All I can focus on right now is the present. And there's a really good exercise, and I'm going to do this with you now. So I want, even if you are, I know I can't see any of you, it always works better if I can. I want you to close your eyes, and on 3, I'm going to select someone in the chat to start singing. 1, 2, 3. I'm not going to select anyone, and I'm sure you might be laughing. There might be a couple of you that were thinking, what song am I going to sing? I reckon David Lemon's one of those. And what's happened there is that you might start feeling a bit anxious. You might have your heart rate might have gone up. You might have getting a lump in your throat or a tight chest. That's something called the amygdala, which sits like in the middle of our brain, taking over. It's like our alarm system. It goes off at the sign of danger or fear, and it hijacks everything in our body. The prefrontal cortex at the front here is responsible for all our decision making, everything that we do. And when that gets hijacked, we can't operate from a place of logic, which is often why after a situation, you might be like, I just wasn't myself. Sorry, that wasn't me. It wasn't you. It was your amygdala taking over. And what happens here is that it takes over and it causes us just to go into a state of like, with no logic at all. So clearing the space focuses on 3 things. The first one is notice it. Second one is name it. The third one is neutralize it. So notice it. Sounds so simple, but notice what you notice. So it's so often we don't notice we're stressed until we're stressed. We don't notice we're anxious until we're anxious or tired or worried. But if we can start to notice what our triggers are, and that's a perfect example there of what you might have been feeling, that's probably a trigger you have a lot of times to different situations. If we can start noticing our triggers. So I'd encourage you after this session or even now, just during it, is thinking about what are my triggers? Like before I actually get into that state of stress or anxiety, what is it? Is it a lump in my throat? Is it sweaty palms? Is it like a tight chest? Is it that I react to people in different ways? I snap? Because if you can start to notice those things, you can stop yourself kind of getting to the bottom of the spiral before you then do something about it. It's harder to bring yourself out of that state when you're in it than when you're spotting it to do something about it. So the first one is notice it. The second one is name it. So name what you're feeling and write it down, because a lot of the times, like what's going on in our head, we can't compute it. You know, I saw a thing a few weeks ago where there's 8,000 or 9,000 words in the dictionary, but there's 36,000 combinations of emotions that we can have, which is crazy. So until we name it, we can't actually be sure of what's going on in our mind. Our brain, our amygdala, just thinks something's wrong. And by naming something, we bring our prefrontal cortex, the front of our brain, back into play. And it allows us to start thinking more logically. It's why we're so good at giving advice to other people, but we can never take our own, is because we've got so much emotion attached to it. So by writing it down, so let's use this example, I feel stressed. We've got it down there. We can now start thinking more logically. The third one is neutralize it. And just to add actually on the name it there, what we're doing here is that we're realizing that the body's in a certain state and we're doing something about it. Because, for example, when the amygdala is going off, it's a bit like a smoke alarm going off in your kitchen. What do you do when a smoke alarm is going off in the kitchen? You go in there and you turn it off. You don't go in there and just go, oh my God, the house is going to burn down, and just start running around. And that's what our bodies are doing. When they're putting us in this state, they're warning us of a problem. We don't have to live in that problem. We can do something about it. So once we've named it, we then need to neutralize it. And this is, I'd really encourage you to write this down. Don't type when you do this first few times, because everyone can touch type. But I don't know if you've ever tried writing without looking. It doesn't end well. I mean, my writing looks terrible even when I do look. So you're right, I feel stressed. And then the neutralize part is why. So draw 3 or 4 lines. Why do I feel stressed? Like, what are the 3 things right now that are making me feel stressed? Write those down. And then off each of those, is this something I can control? Or if so, what can I do, or what am I doing about it? Again, these are all questions. Out of those 3 things, why do I feel like that? And then each one, is it something I can control? And if I can, what am I doing, or what could I do about it? And what you're doing here is you're building yourself a mind map, really, so that every time you start feeling like that, and it might happen again 5 or 10 times that day, you can look at your sheet and go, I've got this, because 2 of those things I can't control. And the one thing I can, I'm already doing something about it. I might not have achieved it yet, but I'm doing something about it. And again, this is a bit like that smoke alarm example, is saying to the body, saying to the mind, look, you've warned me about this. Here's my plan to overcome this. And it's sort of, again, going back and going, this is serving me. This is helping me think in a more constructive way. So notice it, name it, neutralize it. And I've done a podcast episode about that. If you wanted to have a listen, drop me a message after and I'll share that with you as well. So how does this benefit you? We're able to utilize our emotions in certain situations. So when presenting, building relationships, prospecting, we can be more in control of them. Empathy is a big thing as well, because we're more aligned. We're not so much in our head of thinking of all these things going on. We can actually look to understand and connect with someone more effectively that we're speaking to. And we're also coming from a place of optimism and strong self-belief, because we feel like our emotions are there to support us, not sabotage us. And then finally, we've got habits and behaviors. And this links in, some of you might have seen the session that I did alongside Hettel and Hannah a couple of weeks ago, which I really enjoyed hearing Hettel and Hannah's session on that as well, is around habits and behaviors. So habits and behaviors, when we're coming from a place of lack of awareness, we're quite unaware of our strengths and weaknesses. We don't really know what makes us good at what we do. You know, sometimes it's very easy for us to think, oh, you know, I don't want to boast about what I'm good at, or think about it because I might come across as arrogant. But the problem is, if you're not aware of your strengths or weaknesses, you don't really know what you bring to the party. You're kind of part of the crowd, really, because there is no defining element to you. And you just kind of go on with your daily routine. And the problem with that is you don't know where you need to improve and where you don't really need to focus as much of your time. And you end up investing time and energy in uncontrollables. You end up putting it into things that you can't control, whether it be other people, whether it be, you know, if we're talking about sales here, like opportunities, or we're talking about projects at work, things that you just can't have any influence over, and you worry about something that you couldn't have done anything about. And the problem with that is that your results often don't match your actions, because you're putting all this stuff in at the start and you're thinking, oh, why am I not getting the results I want? Is that, well, you're probably not being conscious about what you're controlling at the start. So therefore you're not getting the outcome at the end. And of course, all of this leads to a lack of consistency. You know, you might have those feelings where you think, oh, I had a really good week last week, but this week hasn't been like that, or last month or today versus yesterday. It's because there's no kind of constant line, because you're not switched on or aware of what's actually going on. What can you influence and what you can't? So what does that look like from the flip side? Now, there's a picture there of the All Blacks, New Zealand rugby team, statistically the most successful sports team of all time. And what the All Blacks do, well, I'll tell you what typically what sports teams do, professional ones, when they win and lose. When they lose, they'll come in early the next day and analyse it. And when they win, they'll go out and celebrate. The All Blacks actually do it the other way around. They released a really interesting book a few years ago, their little black book with all their mantras in. And it mentioned about when they win, they'll come in early the next day and analyse it. And when they lose, they'll go out and get drunk. And I'm not saying when we have a bad day at the office, I'm not condoning drinking here at all. But what I am focusing on more is the other thing around when we win is analysing success. It's very easy that when we have a good month, when we have a good week, when we complete a project, you know, for example, SuperPay, and what we're seeing at the moment is that we just ride the wave, we celebrate, we get really pleased about it, but we don't analyse it. So they believe that it's easier to, you know, replicate something you're doing than changing something you're not. The more you can focus on your strengths and what's actually working and analyze them, the more you can do that again. So if you've done it once, you can do it again another time. You can just adapt it to a different situation. The other thing around this is focusing on the controllables. If you become more mindful of what you're good at and what you're not, but also what you can and can't control, you know where to put your time and energy. You know that these 2 or 3 things in your list that you can't do anything about. So why are you worrying about them? Focus it on something you can. And the problem is, when we focus on uncontrollables, we often focus on the outcome and neglect the process. So we often just think about, oh, you know, this isn't happening, that isn't happening. It's like looking at a math sum and just looking at the answer. It's like, well, you've got to do the workings out. You've got to focus on the process, the controllables, and then you'll get what is uncontrollable, but you've controlled it already. And the other piece around this, there's a really good talk by Simon Sinek that some of you may be familiar with, called The Infinite Gamer. And he talks about this. And when I heard it, I found it resonated so much with me, not just in the world of sales, but just life really. And what Simon Sinek talks about is that we are in an infinite game, which is life. But the problem is we try and look at it like a finite game. A finite game, for example, is a game of sport where you've got a winner or a loser. But we try and do that with everything. You know, that's why we have weeks, months. That's why we have top 10s and all these leaderboards and everything, because we want to have a definition of a beginning and an end. And the problem is when we have that, a few problems arise. He uses the example when we look at an infinite gamer versus a finite gamer. A finite gamer is there to win or lose. An infinite gamer is there to play for a bigger purpose. So if we took Microsoft and Apple as an example, Microsoft are a finite gamer. Every piece of advertising, every campaign they do, whatever they talk about beating Apple. But Apple don't do that. Apple's infinite purpose is making the world a better place through their technology. And that's why Apple wins most of the time, because they're looking at it in a different way. So when Simon Sinek was in a cab coming back from a conference with an Apple employee, one of the first ones, and this was years ago now, Windows or Microsoft had just released their version of the iPod that was actually better at the time. And he turned to the guy and he thought he'd get a reaction from this and said, "This is amazing. Like, it's so much better than the iPods." And the Apple employee just went, "I'm sure it is." And he was like, why are you saying that? And he said, "Well, some days we're up and some days we're down. Like, there is no definitive end or start." And how he saw things was that an infinite gamer, you're a bit like this. It's the natural process of life. Whereas a finite gamer just thinks, right, if I get to here, it's amazing. And if I get to here, it's the end of the world. So if you're a finite gamer and you go through that mindset, when you lose or have a bad day or a bad month or something doesn't go right at work, you think it's the end of the world. You're like, oh my God, you can't see past this. You get so immersed in it that you can't see the wood through the trees. You just can't see anything else. And then when you win, when you have a really good day or a good month, you feel ecstatic, amazing, you feel happy. And then when it disappears, you're like, where did it go? Like you've been craving that kind of win, that feeling, and it's there for a moment and it's gone. And you start searching for it, and then it drags you back down to the bottom because you're looking for something that might have only been brief anyway. Whereas an infinite gamer, what you're able to do is go, okay, hang on a second. if I do have one of those days, it's not the end. It's just a day. Like I can have a completely different day tomorrow. Or just because I've had a bad morning, it doesn't mean it's going to be a bad afternoon. Like I decide how my day goes. I decide how my week goes. I decide how my month goes. And then when I win, I know that, right, okay, let's analyze how I've got here. And if I stop going down up this curve and start going down, don't panic, because I'm not far away from where I was. Because if you're a finite gamer, you start worrying about it. You could have only been like here and you could go back up to here instantly, but because you worry about it so much, you end up going back down and bringing yourself down. So it's kind of looking at it as an infinite game. When you have those challenging days, you're thinking it's just a day, it's just an hour, it's just a morning, it's just one call. And when you win, it's thinking about, okay, I'm not going to feel like this forever, but what can I do to maintain this? How do I become more consistent to achieve this as well? So how can this benefit you? First of all, it's easier for people to buy into you, like building strong relationships, whether that's your colleagues, your team, your customers, in that, because you're aware of your strengths and what you're good at, people can align to that. They can buy into that. They get you because you're coming across more authentic and you're comfortable in your own approach. People go, yeah, I can attach to that person, because people can buy into people like them, but they can also buy into people that are themselves. Aware and utilize your natural styles, I just talked about there. Mindful of how you can impact and influence situations. So again, what can you and can't control? How can you support people in the team? How can you support a situation? And most of all as well, you're more productive because you're focusing on the things you can control rather than the things you can't. So to summarize, thoughts and beliefs, ask questions, not statements. Look at it as limiting and non-serving versus limitless and serving. Are you asking yourself questions or are you making statements? Emotions. You have control how you utilize them. Are they serving you or are they sabotaging you? Every emotion is there to serve you. It's to help you in some way. Whether it's to support you when you feel stressed or worried, it's still there to support you and help you. And habits and behaviors. Analyze success, play to your strengths, and focus on controllables. And before we take some questions, there's one final thing. It was Mental Health Awareness Week a few weeks ago, but I thought I'd go through this slide because I did the mental health first aid champion course. I can't remember exactly what it's called now. I probably should. But just a few bits of advice, because I think particularly at the moment, it's very important with us being all remote, and some of you have teams or just people, even outside of work, really, like friends and family that you might be speaking to and having a tough time. Just some bits of advice really around that. So one of the things is empathy, not sympathy. I think it's something that's confused a lot of the time. And there's a great video by Brené Brown on this. Sympathy is someone tells you a problem and you try and put it into context. You go, well, at least this isn't happening, or at least that isn't happening. Empathy is actually listening to someone, and it's realizing that you don't always have the answer. We're very quick to think, particularly when we manage a team and someone comes to us with a problem or an issue, we think we need to have the answer there and then. And if we don't, we failed. But a lot of the time, if people are wanting to have conversations with you around this, they don't want the answer because there isn't one. Nothing you're going to say is going to make them feel better in that moment. They just want to be heard and be listened to, because that can really help people just sort of sort their own thoughts out sometimes. Another one is just avoid the advice like cheer up, oh, don't worry about it. If someone is worried about something, saying don't worry about it isn't going to help. It's not going to switch that up. And I think the big thing is here as well, like if you feel like someone does need more support, and although you want to help them, you can help them even more by saying, look, what we're talking about now, I can only give you so much advice, but I think these other avenues can really help you. And of course, you can direct them to the avenues that we've got in the business. So thank you everyone for your time today. Any questions? Let's open the box. Again, I realize some of the things I've talked about today, you might have some questions, like personable questions that you don't want to share with a group. So feel free to drop me a message, email me afterwards if you do want to ask something that's kind of hit home today. But if you don't have any questions, it'd be good to actually in your chat box just hear some of your thoughts, like what your key takeaways were or things that you've got from this. You're welcome, Tracy. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Guessing everyone's vigorously typing. You're welcome, Lorna. I'm glad it helped. Yeah, anything that you want to share, even if it's just one point that I talked about that's helped or resonated with you. You don't necessarily need to talk about why. Yeah, Kieran, I thought you'd like the All Blacks bit. It's a good story. Lux, I like the writing down, questioning your emotions and what areas of control. Great. That's all. You're welcome. Glad you enjoyed it. Sheila, any questions you wanted to sort of rhetorically ask that you think might help to expand on?
No, I think you covered everything.
Yeah.
But I've got a question, but it might be more suited for Leadership Lounge. But it was more like, how do you make your teams more aware of self-awareness?
Yeah, it's a good question. That I think it's having those constructive conversations with them. You know, if we look at thoughts and beliefs, first of all, is getting them to start thinking about what the question is and being okay with having these types of conversations. It can sometimes feel like, oh, is this my job, or am I qualified for it? And I wouldn't say you need to be qualified for it. You just need to have the right kind of mindset around it. So when they are coming to you with challenges and issues, it's just starting to get them to think, okay, how can you work around this? Because it's very easy sometimes as leaders, as managers, that we think we know we have the answer, that we're just going to give it to them. But it can be more beneficial sometimes to get them to try and figure that out, to start working around it. And then also in your one-to-ones and your conversations with them is to start getting them to think about, you know, their strengths and their weaknesses. Like, where we have this misconception sometimes that we need to be amazing at everything, and if we're not, then we're just somehow failing. And that's where imposter syndrome can come from as well. So I think with those kind of things, it's just helping your teams define, what are you really good at? Because that will help you when you are working on projects together, to build the right kind of people together and get people to realize, okay, well, if you're not great at this is fine, because we can pair you up with this person, or you can have some mentoring or some buddying with this person, and vice versa. They can learn something off of you. So that would be probably a bit of a snapshot advice really on that.
Cool, great. There's also a question in the Q&A, I think.
Oh yeah. Is there anything else that you initially thought wouldn't work or be useful, or felt internal resistance, but later became useful? Is there anything? It would be good. Whoever's asked that question, thank you for it. Just a bit more context around that. Is there anything that you initially thought wouldn't work or be useful, or felt internal resistance? Is this in terms of some of the exercises, or yeah, if you can just expand on that a bit more, happy to answer it. Lorna, I really liked the name, the feeling, and address it rather than just sitting back and waiting for it to pass. I'll definitely be looking into this. Great. Sandra, really enjoyed it, and great believer in power of refocusing attitudes, opinions, and beliefs. Good. David, I want to know, were you the one thinking, what song am I going to sing? I feel like you would be. Oh, okay, yeah. So, i.e., any exercise or aspect of mindfulness that you were skeptical about, but overcame that skepticism. I think writing things down, like, it sounds so, at the start, you just think, oh, we've got a laptop. Like, you know, I get this sometimes when I do talks to people and other things, is even with coaching, is people are, oh, just type it. It's writing it down. It makes when you actually start doing it, makes a big difference. You know, it's why you write down to-do lists and other things. I think that's I wouldn't say skepticism about it, but I just sort of felt at the start, what difference does that make if I write something down or not? But by doing that, we can just look at it in more of a logical manner. I think also, you know, meditation, again, is something that some people might feel can be a bit fluffy, but, you know, it's not there sitting in there with candles and just having some weird music on, some type of whale music on. I think just getting used to it, and even if it's just doing it for 30 seconds or a minute to start with, can be really beneficial. I think that's it. Yeah. So unless there's any other questions, thanks everyone for tuning in. Appreciate you joining me. And I'm going to be doing this on Leadership Lounge next week. So if you wanted to tune back in for any of the leaders or managers on here for a bit of a refresh, then feel free. But yeah, good to see you all virtually, even though I can't see your faces. And I'll catch you soon. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, David.